Initially, when we first started this symposium back in 1978, it seemed like that most of the research being done was in the United States, not so much done in Europe, although we didn't know about it maybe. Anyway, I think the symposium helped to bring together all the people around the world that do breast cancer research, from Europe to Asia, and I think that's made a major impact. I have many friends now throughout the world because of this symposium. I think it also spawned some similar meetings now ongoing in Europe and other places to spread the word about breast cancer research and the accomplishments that we've made. So I think it's had a major impact across the global spectrum. Well, seminal presentations over the last few years have been many. I guess over the last recent years, then the most promising ones and the ones that received most headlines were the antibody-drug conjugates like TXD and sacituzumab govitecan. Those studies were very important and very important studies that will set practice for recent years. Also immunotherapy studies like the Keynote 522 study, another one. But I'd like to go back to the most important study I think that I can remember. That was in 2004 when the ATAC trial was first presented. The ATAC trial was a comparison of an aromatase inhibitor called Arimidex or anastrozole versus tamoxifen versus a combination. That was the first study that showed that the AIs were a little bit better than tamoxifen. And everybody was on pins and needles to hear about that. I actually presented Mike Baum, who presented the study at that time. And I said, before I introduced him, I said, I'm sorry, but the next abstract has been taken off the docket. We're not going to do it. And everybody went, oh my God. I said, just kidding. So Mike Baum gave that talk, and I think that really was a major talk early on that really changed the practice of medicine. Well, I started taking care of breast cancer patients about 50 years ago, 1974, when I was a fellow at the NCI. I can tell you that right now, the treatment of breast cancer in every way is totally different than it was back then. It's amazing when you go back and look at it. It was a surgeon's disease. We didn't have adjuvant therapy. We didn't have tamoxifen. And then in the late 70s, estrogen receptor was identified. It was actually identified earlier than that. But we began to use it clinically in the late 70s. And then tamoxifen was approved in 1978 for metastatic disease. That's where it took off. And we really started then to learn more about the biology of the disease and improvements there. And then finally, the genetic era started in the 90s when we began to see that there were certain breast cancers that were hereditary and had a genetic mutation. So that led to additional studies. I think all these things, all these factors are really important. We'll continue to improve our prognosis of patients. Again, I think immunotherapy is going to be a big one. I think de-escalation therapy is going to be a big one. I think in the HER2 realm too, we made a lot of progress in HER2 positive breast cancer. You know, it used to be thought of as maybe the most aggressive cancer of all and highly proliferative and rapid recurrence and death. Now I think it's the best tumor to have if you have breast cancer because we have so many good therapies for it, but we're still lacking some therapies. There are some patients who are resistant to HER2 targeted therapies, some patients who still develop brain metastasis, but we're making headway in all those areas, and I think that's going to be an important area of research. I have several patients now who had metastatic HER2 positive breast cancer, including brain metastasis, and they're now cured, at least they're without evidence of disease several years later. So I think those are the areas we make a lot of headway in. Resistance mechanisms would be another one. Why do certain tumors become resistant to ER-targeted therapy, HER2-targeted therapy, and immunotherapy? The meeting, I think, has been important and will continue to be important. There are a number of meetings ongoing now around the world that sort of mimic or are trying to do the same thing as the San Antonio meeting. The San Antonio meeting, I think, is still, first and foremost, a translational meeting. That is, we have both basic science there and we also have clinical science. And when Dr. McGuire and Dr. Coleman invented, if you will, developed this symposium back in the late 70s, that was their vision, to have basic scientists and clinicians sit side by side in the audience, listening to each other's talks, and with the idea that that would help us translate discoveries from the laboratory into the clinic. And I think that's really served its purpose. It still tries to do that. I think it will continue to do that in the future.